Dogman interrupted our all-night rave. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story for you involving the Dogman in upstate New York that dates all the way back to the psychedelic 1990s. Back then, I was a young adult on the outskirts of a rave scene. We would schedule secret all-night parties in places where the establishment were unlikely to find us. We would never hold an event in the same place twice, and we managed to keep it fun and safe for a period of almost 3 years before I drifted away from that scene. And this one outdoor event in the country, located far enough from anyone's home that we could blast our music at epic levels of volume, came to be best remembered not for the DJ, not for the music industry celebs that showed up, but for a certain uninvited guest that we would now call a Dogman. I'll tell you what happened. It's actually a pretty short story. Back then, my roommate was a DJ we can call Spike, which is a private in-joke, not the name he actually went by back then or now. He's the one who clued me in about this event. I rode there with him in his wheels, and the next morning, he was the one I asked to confirm what I had seen the night before. I recall the event being in the woods near Whitehall, which is in upstate New York. I remember that it was a 4 or 5 hour drive from our apartment in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which Google Maps confirms is around that long a drive to travel between. I didn't know at the time that Whitehall was so associated with cryptids. In fact, I'm not sure if any of us even knew of the word cryptid in those days. As an older person now looking back, I can't imagine we would have been partying there if people knew what else was in that forest on that night. We were only concerned about waking the human neighbors and getting in trouble. We had no idea that we might end up waking a Dogman. So the party was underway, and the experience was quite intoxicating in every sense of the word. The women looked like angels, and the music felt transcendent. Everything seemed so much more intense than normal life that when I saw a figure looming 3 feet taller than everyone else, making its way into the crowd, I was not all that taken aback by it. My first thought was that I was watching someone riding on someone else's shoulders. People used to sometimes do things like that at these events. When the figure drew closer to me, my next impression was that this was someone wearing a dog mask and riding on someone else's shoulders. That was freaky, to be sure, but these parties were in fact held in order to facilitate freaking out, in a good way. The figure moved through the crowd of ecstatic dancers, with nobody but me seeming to even be looking up at him or reacting to him in any way. People, I guess, were into their own trips, and I seemed to be the only one paying attention to this very strange sight. I even began to wonder if I was the only one seeing him. Maybe I was so hyped up on the hypnotic tribal rhythm that I was seeing something beyond the normal. When the figure drew close to me, the crowd seemed to part around us. I looked up into the eyes of this being, and those eyes I looked into glowed a beautiful, hypnotic golden light back at me. I wondered if I was just looking at a remarkably detailed mask of a monster dog with lights in the eye sockets, or if I was looking into the eyes of some kind of superhuman canine being, like maybe something angelic, or possibly demonic. But once we were standing in that clearing together, I could look down below his face and chest finally, and I could see him from head to toe. I say he, because this was a male, and that was unmistakable, since it was not clothed in any way. I could smell his somewhat intense body odor, although I admit the smell of sweat was not uncommon on that scene. The dog-headed figure also smelled of wet dog. Clearly this was not someone sitting on someone else's shoulders, and obviously this was not a costume, since the man-sized hairy animal was 8 or 9 feet tall, and there are no human beings that size, as far as I know. This could not have been a person in a costume. I could see the ears on the top of its head moving. I could see the vein popping out in its bicep. I could see its legs, which were shaped in a canine way, not a human way, or even in the way a bear's legs are shaped. This was some sort of half-man, half-wolf type being, towering above all of us like a dark god come back to Earth. I admit I was kind of scared, but at that point it was still in an exhilarating sense, until I looked back up at those glowing eyes, and whatever that creature was, it had grown tired of me staring at it. It began barking out a series of short staccato roars, bending over a bit to sort of get in my face about it. His shouting rivaled the music for volume, and people screamed. I remember one girl looking at him and fainting dead away. The dog-headed monster man screamed and barked at more people, and the circle around him and me grew larger. People began pushing each other to get away, and it looked like a terrible scene was about to unfold. I myself was huddled on the grassy ground in a modified fetal position, looking up at the creature that I felt certain was about to end the story of my life. And the next thing I knew, there was pandemonium as I saw my roommate Spike shooting off a fire extinguisher at the werewolf. Spike had the element of surprise on his side, as I don't think the huge animal had ever seen or felt frozen CO2 fired at him before. And before I knew it, people were back to dancing, and I couldn't see Spike any longer. I got up off the ground so that people wouldn't trip over me, and I stood on my toes, looking over people's heads and trying to see where the Dogman or Spike had gone. That was a close call. I nearly witnessed a mass tragedy in that moment, with the most tragic part being my own demise. It didn't happen, though, and I spent the rest of the party wondering if any part of that had actually even been real. As the sun began to come up, we started shutting down the rave and cleaning up the area. Our goal was to leave as little evidence or trash behind as we could manage. I caught up with Spike and asked him what the heck happened the night before. He told me a big Sasquatch had crashed the party, so I knew I really had seen a monster. I questioned him further for a while until I got him to admit without my saying any words, like dog or wolf, that this Sasquatch did indeed have a canine-type head. We didn't have a word for Dogman in those days, at least not those of us from Brooklyn. That was as close as I was going to get in 1991 or so to another witness confirming my Dogman sighting. By the mid-1990s, I read an article in some old magazine about the Beast of Bray Road, and wow, was my mind blown. That sounded a lot like what we'd seen. The fur on the Whitehall Dogman had been gray, while the Wisconsin and Michigan werewolves reported back in those days seemed to mostly have dark black fur. Other than that, I felt that these were the same species being seen in different states. I remember showing the magazine to Spike, who I was no longer living with by then. He didn't seem to want to talk about the creature we encountered at that rave anymore, though, not even in private. He gave me strange looks and asked why I was still obsessed with one 10-minute incident from years earlier. To be honest, I think he was too scared to talk about it, and he seemed even more frightened that I had found confirmation in print that the creature might not only exist in upstate New York. No matter how reticent he's become concerning talking about the incident in the years since, Spike never denied that it really did happen. He was just too unnerved to continue talking about, or even thinking about, the night when Dogman interrupted our all-night rave. Braden Russell packs power and muscle. You want him on your side when you're in a tussle. He's a guy who knows how to hustle. He'll never cause a fussle because he's Braden Russell. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Braden Russell, for making this extra long episode possible. In exchange, Braden gets to see all our secret episodes, advanced previews, and over 21 hours of archived uncensored Dogman stories that YouTube would never allow us to tell on this channel. And you can get all those perks too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or do what Braden Russell packing power and muscle did and click that shiny jolly join button under this or any of our videos. Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of this episode to give you more details, but first we got another bunch of Dogman stories for you, including one read by the original reader on this channel, PQ Ribber himself. And now settle back because we got another hour or more of non-stop Dogman. Enjoy. So, my 21-year-old brother got lost a while back, and it was a horrible time for my entire family, as you can imagine. We feared the worst, and it was exhausting for us all, trying to support each other and keep the search going. I'm going to tell you the end right now and the beginning. My brother is fine. He found his way out of the forest and back to civilization. But after the flood of emotions of the period following his return, when we started to normalize our lives again, we realized that the story of what happened to my brother is a very interesting one. Some of us want to go public, but my parents, and my brother himself, do not. He has, however, granted me permission to release a version of his letter written that night, which never got sent. He tried to get on social media to explain his situation, but there wasn't a good enough signal. He got into his Gmail and wrote the family a long note explaining what was going on, but after he hit send, it went to his outbox and got stuck waiting in queue. I've taken out names of people and places so that the story won't reflect back on my family's business, but other than that, I'm leaving all the details of the story in place. Here's the email my brother tried to send. Hey to all of you. I know you're looking for me or about to start looking for me. Here are the facts. I'm stranded in the forest in Pennsylvania near the border of New Jersey. I don't know exactly where as I can't get my GPS working. However, I am in a house in the basement. I can't leave here now as the place is under siege from one or more entities that I am unsure of the nature of. I saw one of them, and I think I heard or sensed a second one, but I am not certain. I was staying in a motel and out for a stroll in the early evening. Looking off at the forested hills in the distance, I wondered if I could wander a bit into the woods and take a break from normal civilized life for a few minutes. Be careful what you wish for. I used my phone to find a path to the woods and I took it. Soon I was wandering under the dark cover of the trees, feeling like a kid again. I didn't notice that it had also become dark outside of the canopy until I came into a clearing and nothing got brighter. I know it was dumb of me. We get lulled to sleep by civilization and working 24 hours around the clock. We forget that the world is still wild, and forests are really still jungles like they were in the time of the saber-toothed tiger. I looked around that clearing in the dark and my heart dropped. The nostalgic and warm feeling of being in the forest was replaced in the darkness by a sense of terrified awe at the immensity and danger of it. I realized I'd better get out of there fast, so I turned around and headed back the way I came. I only got something like 10 feet when I heard and then saw someone in front of me. Not on the path exactly, but sort of on the side of the path, half in and half out of some trees. This set off an alarm bell inside me, and I immediately stopped moving forward. Why would someone be half in and half out of the trees? Was he going in or coming out? And then my question was answered as he came out of the forest fully and stood there on display, staring at me. It was the tallest man I'd ever seen. I could mostly only make him out in silhouette. It was dark, but he was slightly lit from behind by, I guess, the moon or something. He was so tall that I knew I was in deep trouble, but he was wearing some kind of a thing on his head. His head went up too tall for a normal head, and it seemed like it had ears on top, like a cat or a dog or something. He was just big and muscular and probably an insane furry, and he was standing between me and my motel room in the forest in the dark. I devised a plan. That plan was to get away from this weird giant guy, and then devise an actual plan. So I ran away from that guy, and unfortunately away from my motel, deeper into the woods. Eventually I found this place, which is a tiny house in the forest. The entire upstairs was trashed with graffiti all over the walls, and the windows all broken out. I saw some old bones on the floor, but I saw something else too. I saw a recessed area, which I pulled on to open a door to the basement. Coming down the stairs to here, I discovered no less than 3 locks to lock oneself into this cellar, and I took my chance to lock all 3. Looking around with the light from my cell phone to see if there were any other ways in or out of there, I discovered there were only 3 tiny windows, each just a little higher than my eye line, each right at the ground level outside, looking out on the grass surrounding the place. None of the windows were large enough for me to climb through, but hopefully that also meant they were too small for the lunatic in the dog costume to get in here at me. I tried to get cell reception but failed. I took some pics of the cellar and some of the weird junk piled up in here and wanted to go on social media to post about it. I couldn't connect to anything though, either via an app or from a browser. I gave up and just climbed up on an old work table so I could comfortably look outside and daydream until I felt safe enough to leave. Either the night got a little brighter or my eyes adjusted to the darkness, because the more I looked out there, the more I could make things out. That's when I saw it come out of the woods. I think it was the same man I saw earlier, but I'm not 100% sure. This one seemed a little lighter in color in some way than the previous one, but again, I can't be certain. This was not a guy with a mask on. This was something that looked a lot like a large dog that was walking on its hind legs, but not like it was doing a trick on TV. It was just walking on its hind legs as though that were something that dogs did. I couldn't stop staring at the thing, like it was in a movie, and I was safe in a theater observing it. It had a very long snout, almost like an anteater. From some angles, it looked exactly like a dog-headed guy, but from other angles, it looked like some kind of monster from caveman times or something. It was really stupid of me to stare because it noticed, and it stared back. I ducked down, but it was too late. It knew I was in the basement. It charged the window and smashed the glass in all over the floor. It reached in insanely, grabbing around, trying to find a way in or anything with which to create a way in. Over the next hour, it smashed in all of the windows. I've been reduced to tears as it snarls at me and tries to squeeze its hideous face through the window frame, which is too small. It looks ridiculous and makes itself even uglier. This is when I realized I might not survive the night, so I decided to try to send an email to you all. If it doesn't get delivered, then I hope this cell phone is found, and that someone delivers this message to all of you. At least then, I can give you all a sense of closure. That is, if any of you believe my story. I keep hearing them on opposite sides of the house. There have to be at least 2 of them. I can hear them entering the house above. It's only a matter of time until they find the trap door. I'm going to try to send this email now. If this reaches all of you, please know that I'm sorry I got myself into this. And keep out of the Pennsylvania woods after dark. You don't want to end up like me. I saw 2 different kinds of dogman at the same time. The Dweo and the snarly Yow. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a dogman story that goes way back to before my wife and I were married, when we were first dating each other. We were both around 20 years old at the time, and her family had just begun to get to know me. I wasn't sure about how they saw me or felt about me, so one week, when they invited me to meet them at their church that Sunday, I took it as a sign that they were beginning to see me as a good choice for their daughter. I tried to act as normal as possible, like someone I had seen on TV. Nobody in my family was normal. We were all weirdos, so I took my cues from television and tried to behave in a way I hoped they would see as civilized. Bonnie, not her real name, looked awesome, but I forced myself not to stare at her or say anything ungentlemanly. If you've ever been a 20-year-old guy, then you know how hard that must have been for me to pull off. I must have done an okay job of faking the civilized bit because after the service, instead of walking Bonnie and her family home, Her parents suggested that she and I walk off alone for a while and enjoy the lovely day. In fact, they suggested we go walk along the dry run. It was a real show of trust from her parents that they were encouraging us to be alone. Being young, of course, we aimed to abuse that trust as quickly as possible. The dry run I am talking about is the one in Wolfsville, Maryland. That's where this story took place. It was an old riverbed that was dry much of the year. We knew that if we went into those woods, then took a left at the dry run, it would eventually lead us to the back of Bonnie's parents' house. That's why, when she and I found it, we took a right turn instead. I'd like to take a sidetrack of my own right now and loop back to the name of this town. Yes, it is Wolfsville, and I'm about to tell you about us sighting not one, but two different kinds of strange wolf-like entities. Officially, the town was not named for being the land of werewolves or anything like that. There used to be a family named Wolf that lived there in the 1800s, and that's where the name comes from. But it does seem a bit ironic to me that this is also the general area in which multiple kinds of what we call dogmen have been being reported for years. Stay tuned, I'll get back to that. So anyway, this was one of those days in your life that you live for, that you yearn for. We were both so happy. It didn't matter that we weren't even doing anything. We walked hand in hand. We appreciated each other. We enjoyed being alive. Time seemed to stand still and become eternity all at once. And then, I remember opening my eyes after an extremely romantic kiss and noticing that time, in fact, had not slowed down in the slightest. Back in consensus reality, it had actually been passing more rapidly than either of us could have realized. In fact, it was already starting to get dark out. I bolted up and looked around. Was it gonna rain? Or was it really getting as late as I thought it was? From behind me, Bonnie gasped. She had just checked the time. Those weren't storm clouds overhead. That was nighttime approaching. Bonnie was concerned that we would get back to her family's place late for dinner and squander the good faith we had just won. I was just starting to be concerned that we might be lost. I looked around and realized I was already uncertain where exactly we were, since we had wandered away from the dry run. If we could find our way back to that, we'd have a 50-50 chance of going in the right direction afterward. Bonnie seemed to know where to go, and so I went after her. She cut through some trees, and it was already getting very dark under the tree canopy. My heart quickened a bit, and I started to get a little more nervous, but I tried not to let her see that. After some period of time following her, she suddenly turned and asked me if she had just made the right turn or not. I realized she didn't know any better than I did where we were going. I decided we should stop and take a deep breath, get our bearings, look around, and then make a conscious mutual decision where to go next. She was nervous and antsy and didn't want to stop for anything. She wanted to keep going while discussing it. I put it out that if we kept going, we might be going in a very wrong direction. That caused her to stop, and we both began taking note of our surroundings. Standing there and looking around, neither of us noticed any landmarks or anything that seemed at all familiar to either of us. I looked up at the sky, and I saw the moon. That meant nothing to either of us either. In spite of the fact that she and I had both grown up out in the country, neither of us had ever learned the stars or constellations, so neither of us could ascertain anything from looking up at the night sky. We couldn't tell which way was north, east, south, or west. Something happened just then that helped us make the decision on which direction to run in. We heard the sound of branches cracking and someone or something very large approaching from one particular direction. That narrowed our choices down, and our decision was to run in the opposite direction of that sound crashing through the woods. We soon were making so much noise ourselves, running frantically as fast as we could, that it was impossible to tell if anyone or anything was following us. Our screaming and running was louder than all other sounds in the forest combined. Bonnie was whimpering, and I was huffing and puffing. We both were slipping and sliding and going in all directions besides the one we wanted to head in. We couldn't really see where we were going in the dark, and it was damp and slippery in there. After what seemed like a really long time, we came upon a clearing, and peering out into it from behind the cover of a large bush, we could see the dry run out there. I would have felt a sense of relief, except that wasn't the only thing I saw. I also saw a truly large dog, entirely covered in black fur and with coal red eyes. My first thought was Black Shuck, who was a legend from England. Black Shuck was alleged to have been an immense black dog that attacked churchgoers hundreds of years ago during a thunderstorm. What was he doing back here in Appalachia? Bonnie and I hesitated to leave our safe hiding spot. The dog didn't seem to have spied us yet, and I think we both would have preferred to wait for the creature to leave before entering out into the dry run to find the rest of our way back to Bonnie's home. It stood there as we first spotted it, then took a sitting position and stared, tongue hanging out and panting, into the woods behind us and to our right. It seemed to be expecting something. If it was expecting us, we aimed to disappoint. Although it was dark, and the creature was darker, we could make out some features. It appeared to have pointed ears on top of its head, as it sometimes raised them in the air when listening to sounds that it was hearing deep in the forest beyond us. As for its eyes, all I could make out was that glowing red. I never saw pupils, and I couldn't be 100% sure of what direction it was looking in, since all I saw was glowing red. I did not at the time think it was actually Black Shuck from ancient England, but I didn't think we were imagining it either. I felt as though if we could figure out what made that dog's eyes seem to glow, we would have the solution to the legend of Black Shuck. Rather than feeling that I was having a supernatural experience, I felt I was witnessing scientific proof that Black Shuck could really be based on a true story. I guess my assumption at the time was that if I saw something in the present with my own two eyes, then that made it scientifically true. I did not believe in the paranormal or the supernatural back then, and I felt all such explanations or worldviews belonged deep in humanity's past, back in the time of myth and legend. We lived in the age of science and reason. That's how I felt. Then, that big black dog became stiff and at full attention, noticing something we couldn't see or hear. It began to howl so loud that it was like being hit by a wave of something invisible but hard. We both covered our ears, but it still hurt anyway. In those moments while the great beast howled, I felt as though we had regressed back into caveman times, and all of our primal fears and superstitions had returned full force. Gone was logic. Gone was reason. Back in their comfortable old places were fear, cowardice, and primitive fight or flight. I wanted to run away from their screaming, and it took all of my remaining self-control to prevent me from doing just that. As it was, my cheeks were wet with my own tears. Bonnie, for her part, seemed to be holding it together better than I was. I assumed that was in part due to her trust in me being strong through this, so I wiped my face clean and quieted my internal horror down. We would get through. We would survive. All we had to do was wait for the impossibly large dog to go away. It was at that moment that my sense of hope and internal faith rose just a bit. I would be brave because I had to be, for Bonnie's sake. It was as simple as that. When life seems simple, it feels possible to succeed. It's only when we let life get complicated that we begin to feel like giving up. Confident that I had the entire world figured out, I relaxed, and I watched this giant red-eyed canine, patiently waiting for it to finish its business there and allow us to resume our journey homeward. All of that renewed confidence and hope came crashing down as, to our right, and not very far away, we heard the dog's howl return. The sound of the howling caused us to once again cover our ears due to its painful volume. The black dog out in the clearing, however, obviously recognized the sound of that howl, as it stood up again on all fours and began wagging its tail furiously. It was like a pet dog, excited to see his master return home from work. Whatever had made that howl must have also been the thing we heard in the woods that we had run away from. Was that thing chasing us? Or was it just coming here to meet up with this other dog? Had it heard or smelled us? Were we still safe in our hiding spot? Or was the second still unseen creature going to out us to the other one? Should we be running? Or should we make ourselves as small and silent as we could? We chose the second option. Out of the woods behind us and to our right walked a dark silhouette twice as tall as that dog across the way. I'm talking a good 7 or 8 feet tall. At least that was the impression this thing gave. It was clearly, even in the darkness, an animal, and yet it came out of that forest on its hind legs. Bonnie whispered "Bigfoot" into my ears, and so I looked out, and that was exactly what my mind's eye saw. It was a very tall Bigfoot coming home from work and being greeted by his loving dog. And then, that supposed Bigfoot walked out from the tree cover and into the moonlight. If this was a Sasquatch, it was one with a dog-like head. The first second I saw that monster is frozen in my mind forever. I could see almost all of it in one view, and it was unlike anything I had ever seen before or have ever seen since. It appeared to be ferocious and a carnivore, and yet it was walking fully upright like some sort of British lord or gentleman. It was not hunched over, and it did not look like a primate in any way. It seemed like an elegant, dignified, savage man-eating predator. It looked like it could eat a family of 5 and then go have tea time. I thought in my brain that it was a werewolf at that time, but I didn't think it would ever change back into human form. I didn't think it was actually a British lord. This thing wasn't human at all. It was something other. And once again, my younger self marveled at the, quote, scientific proof of what must have inspired werewolf legends, unquote, walking in front of me. The two immense, hairy beasts greeted each other warmly. The quadruped jumped up on the bipedal one, and at first they really did resemble a human greeting his pet dog. Soon enough, though, the interaction began to include them both sniffing each other's butts, and you knew that neither of those entities out there were human in any way. For one thing, the upright one's eyes glowed just as brightly as the red-eyed shuck one. The thing is, his eyes glowed a kind of amber yellow, not red, so they had to be different species from each other, I would think. The two of them walked off with each other into the forest, and I could see from behind that the upright Dogman had a very long, furry tail and legs which reminded me of the back legs of a goat. It sent a chill through me as the backward bent legs gave the creature a kind of a devilish look. The two of them were out of our view in the woods very quickly. It was remarkable to me how fast the entire ordeal ended, when it had seemed like it might never end only a few seconds earlier. Bonnie and I, holding hands, tentatively came out from behind the bush and ran toward the dry run. We both knew our way from there, and we made it to her house just as her father was preparing to go out looking for us. When the man saw his daughter's nice dress covered in mud, he became furious and asked Bonnie what I had done to her. She told him it wasn't me, it was a giant dog and his werewolf master that we were avoiding that caused her Sunday clothing to become a mess. I didn't expect him to believe her when she said that, but the anger immediately drained from his face, along with any color whatsoever. He put his arms around both of us and led us inside where we were fussed over. After we retold our experience to the family, the parents kept shooting each other knowing glances. I didn't know what any of that meant at the time. After we had finished our narratives, Bonnie's father told us he knew what we had seen because 20 years earlier, not far from that area, he had himself seen one of these two creatures. In fact, he told us it had a name locally, The Dweo or Dweo. Bonnie gasped at the name, recognizing it, but somehow this myth or legend had evaded my upbringing. Bonnie said the Dweo is the local werewolf around there. It had been a big deal back in the mid-1960s when the press reported that a man had to struggle with the creature, who fought on his hind legs like a human. Eventually, the 1960s man was able to drive the Dogman off and protect his wife and young child. Bonnie's dad said the time he saw the monster, it ran across the Dwight D. Eisenhower Highway in the direction of Greenbrier State Park. The entire sighting took up maybe 5 or 6 seconds total, and then the thing was gone. It had been running, he told us, on its hind legs. So what was the other thing we saw, I asked, referring to the quadrupedal red-eyed dog. That, Bonnie's dad told us, was the snarly yow. I smiled and almost laughed, telling him that now he was making stuff up. He was for real, though. The snarly yow is a cryptid described exactly like what we saw, down to the red glowing eyes. It's known to appear in the South Mountain area according to the internet, and South Mountain State Park is literally an 8-minute drive from Wolfsville. So I have to say, Wolfsville, for a place not named after the Dogman, sure has a lot of different kinds of Dogman sightings happening all around it. Those of you who know the area but not these legends might laugh at the idea of such a nice suburban community being haunted by mythical beasts from the deepest forests. However, if you pull back a bit on a satellite map, you'll notice that Wolfsville is in this civilized area situated between two very large swaths of entirely undeveloped natural area. There's state park after campground after natural area after wildlife preserve over there, and enough game for any land predator to survive quite comfortably. Even if I hadn't seen the two dog monsters myself, I would think that they probably could really exist there. But I did see those monsters, and so did my wife. It's not a matter of belief for us. It's a matter of knowledge. We know for a fact that such things do indeed exist. When we had our own children, we raised them to respect the woods as a dangerous place. It's beautiful and bountiful, but it's not a safe place for humans, especially not after dark. And that's because around Wolfsville, stories of werewolves are not just cautionary tales for children. That's because Wolfsville is the home of the Dweo and the snarly yow. I saw Dogman fight Bigfoot out of my window. I live in an area of Pennsylvania where sightings of both Bigfoot and Dogman are fairly common. I have a few friends who made sightings too, and I'll tell you what they told me. I personally never saw either of the cryptids until I saw both of them at once. One of my friends is so well known in this area that if I were to describe this person in the slightest way, everyone around here would know exactly who I was talking about. So I'm not even going to tell you what gender they are, just that they were driving on a private street near here. It was a block with houses on the right and an undeveloped woods on the left. Now I know you're thinking that something came out of the woods, but no. What this person told me personally that they saw was a particularly messed up looking Sasquatch race out of a space between two houses, looking over his shoulder behind him as he ran. His fur was all messed up and he was limping, but it was not a man in a costume because the creature had to be over 10 feet tall. My friend told me that the height and the size of the monster took their breath away. At first they thought it was some kind of a puppet or maybe a man on stilts. But the torso was too long for a man, and the face, which looked like it had just been in a fight, was far too expressive and animated to have been some kind of a mask. That sighting happened only around 11 blocks from where I used to live at the time, so it really shook me up, and I was on the lookout for Bigfoot from then on. I think they told me that story when I was 18 or 19, so that was 10 or more years ago when it happened. The extra creepy part of the story to me back then was that I was wondering what could mess up a 10-foot tall Sasquatch. At the time, I figured it must have been an even taller Sasquatch. I mean, what else is out there? Well, I soon found out. Actually, not that soon, I guess. But a few years after that, my own father told me that he was stopped at a railroad crossing, and in his rear-view mirror, he saw the largest wolf he'd ever seen in his life. It looked like the monster from the original American Werewolf in London, and it lumbered along, coming closer to his vehicle. So Dad looked down the tracks, and the train was coming. He couldn't go forward, and the huge wolf was coming up behind him, casually and slowly. He hit the button on his door that closed up all his windows automatically and locked all his doors. Whatever noise that made freaked the big wolf out. It crouched low to the ground, and even through the closed windows, Dad could hear the thing growling. He wondered if the monster saw his car as another animal, or if the thing understood that he was the only biological part of the car. The train was getting closer and the red light was on, with the clanging alarm sounding, and all this didn't calm the wolf down any. In fact, it agitated him so much that the creature stood up like a bear. Dad said it held its front legs out in front of it and splayed the claws from its paws out wide in a threatening manner. It was making terrible snarling and almost hissing sounds, and its eyes looked insane. Dad said he was so scared he actually beeped his horn at the train to speed it up, as though that made any sense at all. I asked Dad to describe the creature when it was standing, but he said he was mainly focused on how close it was and how soon that train was going to pass. He said he didn't spend even a second of time studying the creature. He just kept saying it was the American Werewolf in London. He saw the American Werewolf in London, but he saw it in Pennsylvania. So the train passed, and the wooden barrier was still not lifted. Dad said his palms were sweating so much it was hard to grip the steering wheel. As the barrier began to slowly lift, Dad hit the gas pedal and sped through it, breaking it off as he sped past. He looked in the rear view to see if he could catch the expression on the monster's face as he realized Dad had gotten away. He couldn't see the monster anywhere behind him. Had it run away? And then something bumped into the car so hard and almost knocked it into the other lane. Staring out to his right, Dad could make out the wolf running alongside his car. Not knowing what else to do, Dad just went faster until he was doing something crazy like 70 or something. I asked him how fast he had to go to get away from the monster, and he said, as fast as he could. I tried to get him to be more specific, but he never really understood my question. I wanted to know what the max speed of the creature was. It seems as though this wolf ran on all fours and only stood on its hind legs. I'm not sure if Dad ever actually saw him walk bipedally, in other words. It was very large, but an otherwise normal giant wolf that would stand on its hind legs to intimidate others it perceived as a threat. It's possible it could walk or run on its hind legs, but Dad never specifically saw that. Now, I have a friend we can call Squirrel for the sake of telling this story. Squirrel likes to go on long nature walks, and he has a sort of a new age side. He always felt he was communing with the spirits of nature when he was out in the forest, so he rarely prepared as well for his hikes as he should have. I always told him, just because you've been lucky so far doesn't mean you'll always be lucky. But he wouldn't listen, and he relied on the spirits of nature to protect him. So one day Squirrel was at my place and we were watching TV, and I wanted to watch a nature documentary. Squirrel told me how he's sick of nature, and I almost fainted. I mean, all this guy ever talked about was nature, so obviously something must have happened. I had to drag it out of him, but basically, he had a frightening encounter with a Sasquatch, and now he's afraid of the woods. He told me he was hiking along a path and got lost. He was feeling thirsty, and it was starting to get dark. He checked the GPS on his phone and saw that he was over an hour away from where he thought he was, and that he was going to have to hike all the way back quickly or get stuck in the dark. Before setting off, he quieted his mind and prayed to the spirits of the woods to guide him back and keep him safe until he could get to civilization and rehydrate. Then, he set off jogging in the direction he needed to go. The feeling of tiredness was setting in more quickly than he expected, and he mentally prayed while running. There was a sudden and surprising crash of leaves and an enraged kind of screaming coming from the woods behind him. Turning, Squirrel saw this really tall, very darkly colored, hairy caveman. He said the skin and the fur or hair were both absolutely ebony black, unlike any animal he'd ever seen. Of course, seeing this animal screaming and running toward him gave Squirrel new energy, and he found himself running impossibly fast, or what seemed impossible to him. He told me it felt like his heart was literally going to blow up out of his chest, yet somehow he was able to keep running for what must have been several minutes. The creature sounded like it was immediately behind him, so he had no choice but to try to keep going. Inevitably, he tired and tripped over his own feet, crashing to the ground in a pile of leaves. He was gasping for air desperately, unable to get up or do anything except try to get air into his lungs. Turning around on his back and looking up, Squirrel saw the hairy caveman walk right up to him. He said the caveman was panting hard too, and he had to catch his breath before screaming at Squirrel on the forest floor. He said he screamed to him like he was lecturing him before firing him or something. He said it was like if your father was angry at you, but was also a savage half-simian proto-human. I asked him how he got away, and he said, well, he didn't really. I asked him what that meant, and he said he just fainted when the Bigfoot thing was shouting at him. It was too much for him to take, and he just became unconscious. When he woke up, it was the morning. Birds were singing. The sun was starting to come up, and all sorts of bugs were crawling inside his clothes. That, according to Squirrel, is the last time he ever went into the woods. The next time I heard about a cryptid was from an ex-girlfriend of mine we can call Martha. She told me she was driving home through this forested area at night, and she saw something a lot like what my father saw. A really huge wolf. She told me she thought it was a dire wolf, like we had seen them talk about it on a TV show one time. It was alongside the road, just standing there watching her. Then as she got closer, the immense wolf dropped its head lower to the ground and started barking at her. She hit the gas and sped past the beast, and it ran after her, just as the other one had done with my father. The difference this time was that this wolf ran after her on his hind legs. She said he was reaching out with his front arms, which she said ended in hands with long nails or claws coming out of them. She could see it making swipes at the rear of her car, but did not hear it ever make contact. She told me that when she got over 60 miles an hour, the creature faded back into the distance. So it sounds like the wolf might be able to run faster than anything is supposed to be able to run. I wonder still, what if it is a dire wolf, or some sort of descendant or offshoot of a dire wolf? What if that's actually what Dogman is? I certainly can't answer that question for myself, because I never saw anything like what my father or Martha saw. Oh yes, I saw a Dogman, but it was just that, a dog-like man. It was not a wolf. It never walked on all fours. It had primate-style legs, not canine legs. It was a really disgusting thing, like a lower form of Sasquatch that even Bigfoot would find sickening. But this is all my opinion. I should just tell you what I saw, instead of telling you what I think about it. My parents were out of town in Florida on a vacation, and my brother was away in college, so I was home alone watching the dogs and going to school. I normally slept in the basement, but for those 2 weeks I was staying up in my brother's unoccupied room on the second floor of the house. I could hear everything that was going on much better from there, and I could see what was going on out in front and on one side of the house from there too. For instance, I could see if someone was coming to visit, because we at that time were the only house down on our end of the road. They've built 2 more since then, but this happened some time back. I was glad to be alone since my girlfriend's family had moved out of town, and she broke up with me because she didn't want to have a long-distance romance. I didn't even recharge my cell phone, or when I did, I kept it turned off most of the time. I was pretty down, but this was my way to work out of it. Just go to school, come home, do my chores, homework, play with the dogs, go to sleep. I didn't even watch much TV during that time. I just wanted to reset or reboot myself. So one night I was sitting in my room, or my brother's room on the second floor, and I was just sitting at the window and looking out at the night. Mostly I was looking at the sky, but I was also watching the trees blowing in the wind, and literally not thinking about anything at all. Just drinking in the night silently, both outside and inside. My peace was broken as I heard what I thought was a woman screaming. Surprised, I stood up quickly and almost knocked over a lamp near me. It sounded like a woman was screaming in the forest, across the street. I ran downstairs and noticed that instead of being at the front windows barking, both our German shepherds were cowering over by the door to the basement. I opened it and they ran downstairs to hide. What did they know that I didn't? I had been all charged up to go rescue the girl in the woods when I came down those stairs, but I had imagined having 2 German shepherds at my sides. If they were too scared to go out there, maybe I should be too. I wandered toward the front of the house to see what I could see, and what I saw was a really scary face coming out of the woods and heading toward my house. I screamed, and I saw a huge hairy monster body follow the hideous face out of the trees. I closed the basement door to protect the dogs. Then I ran upstairs to my brother's room and locked the door. Looking at the front windows, I saw the single most unbelievable thing any human being could ever possibly see. There was a Bigfoot standing in the middle of the street, looking like he was standing on some kind of a play street. It looked tiny under him. This giant black hairy man thing was facing off against the ugliest creature I have ever seen. Both of these things were ugly, but the one that wasn't a Bigfoot was just nauseating to look at. It drooled, and it had... Oh, it's just so disgusting to think about. Maybe I should leave it to your imagination. But the thing had a kind of a dog head. It looked like a man wearing a really dirty old sheepdog costume. It had legs like a man in a costume, not like a dog. But it had dog ears on the top of its head, not monkey ears like a Bigfoot would have. So I would say this thing was a dogman in the truest sense, not a wolfman or a dire wolf at all. Whatever either of these things were, they were both very agitated. The dogman seemed angry, and the Bigfoot seemed scared. It let out a scream, and I'll tell you, it sounded nothing at all like Bobo from the TV. It sounded more like a wounded woman. That was what was making those horrifying screams earlier. Somehow my dogs knew what was making the noise. Had they seen this Sasquatch before? Or others like him? So the dogman thing charged the ape man thing, and they tumbled on the ground making absolutely terrifying noises, snarling and growling and screaming and screeching. It was painful just to listen to it. I wished I could go console my dogs, who must have been freaking out. But I had to keep myself safe and hope this fight got taken elsewhere. Now you might be asking if I got any video of this. The only thing I had with me that would even take pictures was my old cell phone, which would have taken tiny, dark, grainy pictures. I did go and try to turn it on, only to learn that the battery had to be charged up again. I set it to do that, but it took hours, and so the answer is no, I got no photos or video of any of this. Something the dogman did while I was messing with my phone really got the Bigfoot angry. Like something he did crossed the line in Sasquatch terms, because all of a sudden, he just started wailing on this dog-headed creep, just kicking his butt using everything at his disposal. Now it was the dogman's turn to squeal like he was hurt, and he ran away, back in the direction he had come from. The ape man immediately followed. That was the whole story from my point of view. I never got to see either of the monsters that everyone else was getting to see, and then all of a sudden, bam, I saw both. Although when I think about it, I'm not really sure what I saw. Like maybe the messed up looking squatch that my famous friend saw was the same thing as the dog-faced monster I saw. The dire wolf man was definitely different from what I saw. So maybe the kind of Dogman I saw is actually a kind of Bigfoot? I really have no idea. All I do know is that I saw Dogman fight Bigfoot out of my window.
The Vanishing Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. I was an avid outdoorsman the first half of my life and an avid city dweller since then. What happened to change my likes and dislikes so intensely? Dogman is what happened. This story happened around 10 years ago when I was 35. I'd been out of work for over a year, and the stress broke up my marriage. Things are okay for me now, but that was definitely a downtime. I was living out of my car and hunting for most of my food. I'd hunt small game because I had no refrigerator, and whatever I didn't eat that day would be left behind for the scavengers. The other scavengers, beside myself. So ironically, this story, which is about me hunting for Dogman, does not start with me out hunting. It starts with me fishing. Well, I guess fishing is hunting too. It was a nice autumn day, and so I was fishing for black crappie with some minnow bait I got my hands on. I was doing well too. I'd caught 2 pretty big ones and 1 medium before 7 a.m. I know, because after I caught the 3rd, I thought I saw someone peeking out at me from across the lake. I checked the time and made a mental note that it was just 7 a.m. I didn't get another bite that morning, but I kept trying up until noon when my stomach started asking me for some fish. The entire time I had a feeling like I was being watched, kept catching little glimpses of movements from the exact same spot, right across the lake, directly opposite me. I kept an eye on the spot while I cleaned the fish and cooked them over my fire. After eating and still feeling spied on, and looked through my high-powered scope to see what I could see. I rested it on a rock and got into a comfortable position behind, ready to just lay there on the sand, waiting and watching through the scope. And so that's what I did. Quite some time. It's not like I had something better to do anyway. One of the few positive side effects of falling through the grid is that you can sometimes be taught patience, or you get so exhausted from stress that you become the equivalent of patient. Either way, I waited, and I watched, and I was prepared to continue doing both into the indeterminate future. Then I saw it. It was a bear leaning on a tree. A bear leaning on a tree for hours? Maybe it was interested in my fish, or maybe it was doing something else over there and not actually watching me at all. Maybe it was eating its own kill, or maybe it was playing with its family. I was about to put down the scope when I saw the creature's hand. Yes, I do mean hand, and not paw. The fingers were too long to be part of a bear's paw. They looked like human hands, except that their claws were ridiculously long. Could it be some sicko in a monster suit? I'd better be careful. By the time I was thinking that thought, I'd already made it halfway around the lake. I wanted to see more. If this was some kind of exotic animal, I could probably get enough money from bringing in its body that I could get back on my feet again. I had literally nothing to lose. If it turned out to be Bigfoot and I can capture it or kill it, I'm a millionaire. If it turns out to be Bigfoot and he stomps me out of existence, well, at least I went out trying. There's no way I could forgive myself for not trying. Poverty can be soul-crushing sometimes, but a true motivator other times. This was one of those other times. So now, while I was making my way around, I had no idea if this thing was noticing my movement or not. To keep myself hidden, I'd crawled back behind the rock I was using for cover, and then was walking about 1 tree back from the edge around the somewhat circular lake. I tried to keep the spot in focus, but did not waste any time by stopping to check through my scope. I just wanted to get there before the Bigfoot, or whatever it was, realized I had left my side of the water. I was attempting to guesstimate how much further I had to go when there suddenly was an eruption of noise and activity around where the spot had been. Was I discovered? As I watched in confusion, trying to understand what was happening in the bushes, I got hit in the chest with a bellow from whatever the beast was. It sounded almost like a bark. I had heard that Bigfoot could scream so loud it felt like you had been struck in the chest. That's a good way to describe what it felt like to me when that thing barked or shouted. I was completely at a loss as to what to do. I felt panicked in a way I'd never felt before. I can't even explain it. But all logic left me and I stood there befuddled. I didn't run. I didn't charge. I didn't back off. And I didn't advance. I just stood there. The creature advanced toward me, and all I did was wonder what it would look like when I finally got to see it. I didn't wonder what it would do to me or anything else. I just sort of wondered what would happen next in a bizarrely and unnaturally calm state. Then the creature broke through the woods. It was much taller than I had expected. It had strange legs like a minotaur, I thought at first, but they were not cloven hooves. They were like dog feet, only bigger. The feet were much too small to be Bigfoot feet, though. I now started to feel dizzy and the world spun a bit around me. My eyes went up from the legs to the torso, which was entirely covered in dark gray and brown hair, unlike any kind of animal I'd seen. The chest was massive, like an Olympic bodybuilder or something. This guy looked like he had zero body fat, more muscle than possible. Its arms were like fur-covered human arms, popping with muscles and ending in immense, sharp claws. I want to say there were 4 fingers and a thumb on each hand, but it might have been 3 fingers. They definitely had thumbs, however. And then the creature bent down and started smelling me, and I could see this was not a Bigfoot at all. It did not have the head of a primate. It was not like a gorilla or human head at all. It was the head of a wolf or a wolf-like dog, dark-furred, very angry, extraordinarily muscular dog or wolf that walked like a man. And whatever it smelled on me, it didn't seem to like it. The monster fell to all 4s, tilted its head back, and howled. It felt like it nearly burst my eardrums, and I heard a ringing sound for a while afterward. But the ringing sound wasn't so loud that I couldn't hear other howls coming in return. There was more than one of these things. Of course there were. There's more than one of everything. That's when all the shock wore off in an instant, and the cash register in my head started to go ding. I backed off, slowly, pointing my weapon to the ground. This seemed to surprise the dogman. He sniffed the air wildly. I took another slow step back, then another. The great beast snorted as though in disgust at my cowardice. I took another step back, and it grunted, then turned quickly and melted into the forest, disappearing in an almost supernaturally fast manner. My knees buckled under me as I understood the danger was over. For the moment. Because I also knew I was going to track this thing and find where they all live. There was $1 million in this somehow, some way, and I needed more info on this creature before I could cash in. This might be bigger than Bigfoot, actual, living werewolves. I wondered how they came to be. Was it a mutated dog or a wolf? Or had werewolves always been a real animal all along? My life now had a purpose, and I had a reason to get up in the morning besides the usual hunger pangs. I suddenly knew what my mission was besides survival and subsistence. My goal was to bring back some sort of definitive proof of the existence of these giant, dog-headed, hairy men. That would be my ticket back onto the grid. I immediately began tracking the creature, as in immediately. It wasn't exactly hiding its path. In fact, it seemed to be causing as much destruction in its wake as possible, probably to mark its turf more clearly. You can tell how sick I had grown of living out of my car. I knew that one of these dogmen could kill me, and yet I was following a trail back to where I expected to see an entire family of them. There was nothing else in my life at that point which would give me the chance to rejoin humanity. Over a week later, I was still following the trail which wound around and crossed over itself multiple times throughout the forest. I subsisted by dining on acorns and sometimes the squirrels I stole the acorns from. I felt very at peace, ready at any moment to either achieve something great or else literally die trying. I had come to terms with the idea of death and was ready to accept whatever script I got handed. Eventually, I actually located a group of the dogmen. I don't think this was a home or nest. I think they were just relaxing and grooming each other in a clearing. They appeared to have eaten recently, although I saw no signs and smelled no smells of a carcass. After an extended period of spying from a distance of approximately 830 yards, I had still not formulated a plan, but I had sussed out that there was what appeared to be a nuclear family in front of me. There were 2 large ones and 4 small ones. I can only assume they were parents and offspring. The younger ones were pretty big in their own right. They appeared to stand almost 5 feet tall, whereas the parents were more like 6 to 7 feet tall. Sometimes you formulate amazing, seemingly perfect plans, and then fate makes them go all wrong. Other times, fate makes a plan for you, and you find yourself thrust into it. One of the young dogmen decided to go for a walk in the forest in my direction. It was not followed by the others, so I assumed it was understood by the entire family that the young one was not going far. All I hoped was that he would go far enough. As I watched him or her walk away from the others and closer to me, I was weighing the creature in my mind. And like the parents, it was skinny. Looked lighter than a human, maybe 100 pounds on the outside. Could I get it back to my car? And if I did, would I be safe in the car? At that point, I started doing mental calculations about how far away my old Ford might be. I'd been following this trail for days, but it had wandered in circles. If my compass was correct, and it often was, then I might be about an hour's walking from my car. That's an hour walking with a backpack. I'm not sure how long it would take to walk while carrying a teenage dogman. I was praying I would live long enough to find out. The young creature was now probably only about 40 feet away. I resolved to wait until it had passed me, then get between it and the family before they knew what was happening. Then I'd run. Sounded simple in my mind. Very little chance it could play out so simply in real life. The creature stopped. It stopped. It stopped about 15 feet short of my hiding spot. Had it seen me or smelled me? Then I heard a sound of water falling and smelled an unmistakable scent. The creature must be male, judging from how high it was aiming while it relieved itself. Quite impressive, actually. Now, I had a problem. The creature never made it all the way to me. My mind was filled with confusion. I saw the young dogman begin to turn to rejoin his family, and all time slowed to a near standstill. My body took off toward the creature. I wanted to get between it and its parents, and my only time to do it was the present moment. I was probably running to my death, but I did it anyway. I was so loud, crashing through the bushes and trees, that of course the young dogman heard me. He turned and looked, and I swear he turned his head sideways, questioning at me like the old RCA Victor logo. I almost laughed in the second. It was a real namaste moment for me. I saw another point of consciousness in the eyes of that creature. That's why it pained me in the heart to aim at it. That's what I did. Because ending this innocent animal's life would gain me the approval of other hominids of my own kind. Knowing that I was probably sealing my death warrant, I took aim at the creature's head at maybe 5-foot range. There was no way I could miss. Then I noticed there were no dogmen. The entire family had disappeared. Were they still around me but invisible? The idea sent a chill through my entire body. I stopped and listened, but I couldn't hear anything over my own heart beating. I turned in the direction I thought my car would be parked in and ran. I ran for however long it took, probably an hour or more. I'm a bit blank about that. I just know that when I got in the car, I turned the ignition and drove. I drove as far away from that place as I could get on a half-filled tank. I literally drove till I ran out of gas, and I went in the back seat and passed out. I don't know how long I slept. Life had become too surreal to count minutes any longer. I got out my gas can and started to walk forward, not really sure how long it would be till the next gas station. So the Dogman was not my ticket out of poverty, but at least I was still alive. When I reached the gas station, I met a nice old preacher named John. He offered to pay for my gas if I could drive him to the next state over. He was starting a new mission to help the homeless. Well, I told him, by a remarkable coincidence, I happened to be homeless. I drove Preacher John where he wanted to go, on his dime, and when we got there, I got out with him. He gave me a paying job, a room to sleep in, and now 10 years later, I'm back in control of my life again. So in the sense that Dogman frightened me off in the direction of that gas station, where the direction of my life was changed forever, I guess you could say that Dogman was an agent of fate. I guess you could say Dogman saved my life.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.